Chapter 10, Part 2. Before leaving, she commissioned Rishi Pin to write her play. She also, possibly in rebound from tortures of her marriage, took him on as her lover. Jean Richepin was in every way the antithesis of Jacques de Mala. 5 years younger than Sarah, he was a magnificent specimen of healthy masculinity, with broad shoulders, exuberant manner, and a warm, booming voice. Castelot speaks of him as a force of nature. The son of an army doctor stationed in Algeria, he served as a sharpshooter in the Franco-Prussian War, after which he'd been a sailor before the mast, a stevedore, and a professional boxer. At one time, he lived with a band of gypsies in the forest of Fontainebleau. At another, he performed as a tumbler, wrestler, weightlifter in the Neuilly Fair. In 76, he wrote a volume of poems, Les Chansons de Gueux. I don't know how to pronounce that. I'm not even going to try. Which depicted the miseries of vagrants, tramps, and the down and out with such bitter invective against the ruling social system. He was sentenced to a prison term plus a fine for offending public morals. All of this gave additional aura to his picaresque nature. A sort of prince of Bohemia, he looked like an actor impersonating one of the romantic vagabonds of whom he wrote. Bearded, handsome, he often strode along the boulevards with his shirt open at the neck as though he were hiking along a country lane. He gloried in wind and sun and manly exercise. Of an early morning, he could be seen bicycling around the lakes in the Bois, sporting a tight-fitting sweater which showed off his superb muscles. Goncourt speaks of Richepin with his powerful and smiling personality, like an acrobat who has just performed an astonishing feat. This man, when he entered a room, seemed to bring with him a bracing breath of fresh air, and Bernhardt, sick of the fetid atmosphere that fairly emanated from her husband, found her spirits lifted and her energy restored by his infectious vigor. They conducted a whirlwind affair on a whirlwind tour. In Copenhagen, George Brandes wrote to a friend, Sarah the Divine was here with her shadow Jean Richepin, the poet of Les Caresses. She was always with him, dined and slept with him. The tour wound up with a 1-week stand in London, which she gave 10 performances of Fedora to cheering houses. Then she went back to Paris. When she entered her house, the domestic staff was in a state of agitation. Monsieur, it seemed, tiring of his career as an Algerian Spahi, had returned. She found him in his room, lying on his bed, stark naked, serenely reading a novel. When she demanded what was the meaning of this, he coldly replied, what was the meaning of what? Wasn't this house legally his as well as hers? And went on reading his novel. Sarah, with a heavy heart, told Richepin what had happened and said that she felt it her duty to go back to her husband, if only to rescue him from the drug habit. Richepin, with expansive good humor, said that he understood, and he added that when she eventually came to her senses and booted Jacques de Mala out of her house and life, he'd be waiting for her. She leased the Porte Saint-Martin Theatre, where she played Frou-Frou in La Dame to good returns. Her prodigal husband spent the time lolling about his house in a stupor of morphine or flagrantly betraying her with other women. He made her life an utter hell. Sometimes he'd wander into the theater during a rehearsal to strut about as though he owned the place. He took every opportunity to make sneering remarks about his wife in front of the company, and more than once referred to her as the long-nosed Jewess. He was openly carrying on an affair with a young ingenue in her troupe, and when Sarah found it out, she fired the girl. After which de Mala skipped off with the little creature to Monte Carlo, where he lost 80,000 francs at a baccarat. at baccarat. He then had the gall to wire Sarah of his predicament, and she had the foolishness to scrape up the amount and send it to him, along with a letter begging him to return. He did, and with the ingenue, who immediately put in a claim for back wages. For a time he stayed home, his addiction growing steadily worse. He no longer tried to conceal it, and even in the presence of company thought nothing of taking out a hypodermic needle and giving himself a shot right through the trouser leg. By now he had got up to 8 or 10 a day. Sarah did everything in her power to stop him. When he was away from the house, doubtless with one of his women, she would ransack his room and throw out all the files of the stuff she could find. In those days, there was little curb on the sale of narcotics. She looked up the pharmacist from whom Tamala got a supply, and when the man would not promise to refuse her husband any further sales, she broke an umbrella over his head. None of these expeditions effected anything other than bitter quarrels and vituperative invective between the miserable pair. As always, the press was cruelly gleeful. L'Événement published a scathing article on the clamorous and battling menage of the Avenue de Villiers. Another paper ran a caricature of the Greek sprawling insolently on his wife's famous divan, the caption reading La Damala aux Camellias. At last the actress could no longer put up with the public humiliations of vicious marital indignities. One day, after throwing Damala's drug supply down the drain, she threw the man himself out of the house. He entered a sanatorium, and Sarah arranged for a legal separation. Being a Catholic, she never considered getting a divorce. The year 1883 was a bad year. True enough, Sardou approached her with another play, Theodora, but she had to put him off as she'd made a previous commitment to Jean Richepin. A man of his word, Richepin had waited until the banishment of Damala and had re-established himself as the current Bernhardt lover. He had also come forth with the promised play, and it was a pity that he had. The piece was Nana Sahib, and it was awful. Laid in India at the time of the Sepoy Mutiny, the plot involves a rebel potentate, Nana Sahib, Jama, his beautiful mistress, a large cast of improbable characters, and a mass of extras doubling as courtiers. Sepoy,